The EU monitoring mission is engaged in espionage. Its real purpose is not to ensure stability at the border, but to establish control over the Armenian side and to collect data. The European Union is trying to sever Armenia from its traditional allies and turn it into a tool of the West. The EU threatens the national church and Christian values. The EU did not provide sufficient help to Ukraine or Georgia. The same will happen with Armenia. Have you ever heard these claims? Most likely yes, if you follow the news on Armenia, including content circulated by Telegram channels. Who spreads these false theses about the EU? Why are they being spread? When did their dissemination intensify in Armenia? And most importantly, what is the EU doing to counter these false claims around its name? Human rights specialist Andranik Shirinyan links the spread of disinformation to Armenia's defeat of Karabakh, 2020 war, and subsequently to Russia's failure to fulfill its allied obligations, after which Armenia adopted a diversification policy.
After the 2020 war, especially when Armenia's so-called traditional ally did not come to its aid, neither in Armenia itself nor in Nagorno-Karabakh, and even when attacks took place inside Armenia's borders, Armenia adopted a diversification policy. This undoubtedly angered and frustrated Armenia's traditional allies, in this case, Russia. The deepening of EU-Armenia relations led to the launch of disinformation campaigns by Russian media organizations, spread both through their websites and on social media. Telegram channels, in particular, have been very active, as they are widely used not only in Armenia, but also in Russia, and, more broadly, across the post-Soviet space.
According to Ani Grigorian, head of CivilNet's fact-checking team, these narratives have always been circulated, but they gained new momentum alongside the deepening of Armenia-EU relations.
At present, the EU has a much larger presence in Armenia through its civilian monitoring mission, which is currently observing the Armenia-Azerbaijan border. Such developments have given rise to new disinformation narratives targeting the EU and individual EU member states. For example, in the case of France, whose role in relations has become more active in recent years, our ties have deepened significantly, in particular in military cooperation, and France is supplying weapons. This is a new level of cooperation for Armenia, since until recently, weapons have been supplied to us mainly by Russia.
European integration expert Mane Adamian does not connect the spread of disinformation to any specific event. She believes that the dynamically developing Armenia-EU relations have, on the one hand, disturbed those political circles that envision Armenia's foreign, economic, and security policies exclusively within Russian integration structures, and on the other hand, overly excited circles that search for Western saviors. Adamian is convinced that each of these groups contributes in its own way to the spread of disinformation. If we also add the post-war frustrations, the wide use of external hybrid tools against Armenia, and the emotional intensity characteristic of pre-election periods, we get exactly what we see in the information field today. Experts conditionally divide the false theses into the following groups: political and security-related, cultural and value-based, economic, and others.
Perhaps the first one is the issue of values. The disinformation campaigns being spread are based on the values that the EU traditionally promotes in the states within its borders. These campaigns especially target, for example, sexual minorities, claiming that the EU is strengthening its relations with Armenia, mainly in order to spread LGBT propaganda. This is, of course, disinformation. Another narrative being spread, particularly active in the last 2 or 3 years, targets European observers. And these come not only from Russia, but also from Azerbaijan, claiming that EU observers are spies, spying on Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and transferring data to the European Union or to some other third country.
In our work, we have constantly monitored these topics, and they are identical because both Azerbaijan and Russia claim that the EU monitoring mission is engaged in espionage against Iran, Russia, and Azerbaijan, and that they are NATO troops armed and deployed here. This is disinformation. They are not armed. They are armed only with binoculars, so to speak.
The situation is almost identical in neighboring Georgia, with certain specificities. There, Sandro Gigauri, senior researcher at the Media Development Foundation, notes that before the war in Ukraine, the main sources of disinformation about the EU were Kremlin-aligned circles. But in the last 2 years, pro-government and government-affiliated forces have joined them.
First is obviously democracy and sovereignty-related narratives and disinformation, which basically means that these actors are claiming that the EU is interfering in Georgia's domestic affairs. It has double standards, that it's criticizing Georgian democracy and Georgian sovereignty in general, when the EU itself has its own problems of sovereignty, and then we can see all of the smaller and like narrower manifestations of those narratives. The other one is foreign policy and security related disinformation and narratives. And that basically echoes the narrative that the West and the EU in particular wants Georgia to open a second front with Russia, and that the current government is basically the only force that is somehow trying to stop that from happening. So those are, I would say, the newer narratives. You can also include narratives regarding the elections, the recent elections in Georgia, because many of those actors were also blaming the EU in interfering in Georgian elections. There were also attempts of blaming the EU ambassador in Georgia.
Narratives about threats to traditional values and identity also have a place in the general palette of disinformation in Georgia.
Point out identity-related disinformation, which has also existed in the Georgian informational landscape for many years now, and that narrative revolves around EU being this depraved, morally corrupt institution that is trying to basically erase Georgian traditional identity
and the values
and impose
and the values,
unacceptable values upon the Georgian population. Exactly.
And how to fight this propaganda effectively? What should the European Union do? According to Mane Adamian, the most effective way to fight disinformation is timely distribution of accurate information. From this perspective, especially in terms of speed, there is serious work to be done, both by Armenia and by the EU. The head of the EU delegation to Armenia, Ambassador Vasilis Maragos, acknowledges that yes, more work is needed, and the public may justifiably expect more, but work is being carried out, including in cooperation with Armenia's civil society and professional journalists.
Listen, we can always do better when it comes to communication and information, because actually the Armenian public deserves to be informed about what we are doing. We are making significant efforts from our side. We are organizing events. We are publishing information in social media. We are giving interviews like this one, and I think that this is a very important contribution. But at the end of the day, it is not only about us to talk about the European Union. We are also investing in the beneficiaries of our projects, in the beneficiaries of our actions, the beneficiaries of our interaction with the Armenian public. And I think we have to do this even better in the future.
According to the ambassador, the EU civilian mission, which is monitoring Armenia's borders, can itself become the best tool against disinformation.
The Armenian public expects us to do better, and we are going to invest even more in our communication about what we are doing. But in reality, it is not only about communication. It is about being efficient, providing the support which the Armenian society is expecting from us, and also being efficient when it comes to the implementation.
Ambassador Vasilis Maragos is optimistic about strengthening the EU's image in Armenia. To make his point, he lists all the projects the EU is implementing in Armenia to strengthen the country's resilience, particularly in one of its most vulnerable regions, Syunik.
And this is something which will continue. It will continue because we believe in the resilience and the strength, the spirit of the Armenian people, and we are here to support them as partners. So I'm optimistic. And of course, we have to continue working together with journalists, with civil society, with local people, in order to strengthen the media literacy. What we have to make sure is that we have an educated public, which is a conscientious consumer of news, and also actively contributing to creating an information environment which is positive for Armenia itself.